Four things I would like to talk about when it comes to what does supporting public sectors look like. First, about the ownership. We think that the ownership will exclusively be reserved to the public sectors and public companies. But second, we think collaboration is necessary for certain times, and we do agree for collaboration to happen. But what does this look like, right? For example, we think that looks like in terms of space exploration or programs where you require technologies. We think that usually we are allowed to collaborate with private sectors in terms of using their technologies and using them to benefit for the public sector. But third, when it comes to the incentives, we think that the incentives of government and public sectors, there is an incentive to run operations efficiently. Why does this happen? Two things. First, we think that there is scrutiny from opposition party. What does this mean is when you majorly fuck up like the operation and when you don't run certain operations efficiently, that means there is still an opposition party to point out that you're fucking up, and we think that usually in this case, there is an incentive for governments and public sectors to run it efficiently. The second thing is, we don't think that they would want to make it like an extreme burden or economic burden because they're still using tax money for their operation. So we think that there is still an incentive for them to have the kind of moral balance when it comes to wanting to run the operation properly because they're still using tax money from the citizens. And we think that in itself it creates a scrutiny as well. But fourth thing that I would like to talk about in terms of my setup and what the supporting public sectors look like. We think that the allocation of resources are transparent. And we think that usually this means that when it comes to public sectors, there are more incentives and more public scrutiny that becomes applied, and I'll also expand upon that later. Two arguments then. First, lack of accessibility is on their side, and second, why do we think we provide better quality of services? First argument, why on their side there's a lack of accessibility that is generated with this privatization? Three things. A, we think that there will be a lack of competition on their side because there is always a first mover's advantage when it comes to things and public utilities that we're talking about. When it comes to water, when it comes to transportation, there's always a first mover's advantage. Wherever you can set up like the first pipe, that means you basically get to secure the business of these people around the area. But B, we think the demand, but even if we were to say that competition is existent on their side, we think that two things will happen. A, there's still an incentive for privatized companies to raise the prices altogether. So there is a collective incentive because they always want to profit off of their business, and they would have that incentive for them to all raise the price together instead of like competing for the lowest price on the market. But second, we think that even if competition exists and magically some company wants to provide the lowest price and wants to provide this accessibility, we think that they will fail anyways. The example to this is Rakuten, because Rakuten, in terms of where telecommunication is extremely expensive, Rakuten stepped in and said that this is wrong and we are providing cheaper costs and we are providing like better accessibility. But ultimately, their business plan failed because they can't outcompete with the first mover advantage that other telecommunication companies already had. But we also think that ultimately there is less of an incentive for like people to opt in to a newer company because they're usually used to their older company more, right? The third thing under lack of accessibility is that the second thing under lack of accessibility is that the demand is persistent. So you can't opt out of using public utilities. So therefore, this means that there is a lack of veto power from the consumers. We think that usually when it comes to like water, when it comes to like telecommunications, those things are extremely necessary for the consumers, and therefore the demand is very persistent to the point where we don't think that like competition or anything, and we don't think that on their side like there is that accessibility. But we think that even if you are able to provide that accessibility, we think that the veto power against government is always stronger than what you have towards private companies. Why that is the case is because when you subscribe service from private companies, that means the only way for you to rebel against that is for you to boycott the kind of services that they provide. What this means is, under the characterization that your demand is going to be persistent, is that ultimately you're going to cut off your own water or telecommunication in order to rebel against this service. But we think that likely that is not going to be possible in most cases. So we think when it comes to public sectors and government trying to run a business, the way that you can rebel against this is using your own veto power or political power to say that, oh, this is something that is wrong, I want cheaper prices, I want cheaper things. So ultimately, we think that accessibility will be better provided on our side. But the third thing under this is we think that there is more incentive to expand into rural areas for governments, because there is no profit incentive for privatized companies to expand into a place with lower demand, and we think that also local politician exists for the government to want to expand into certain areas. Moving on to the second argument then, we provide better quality of services. Three things. A, we think that private sectors have the incentive to hide their intellectual properties because they don't want to be outcompeted. They also don't want to generally let other people use this, right? So that means this collaboration that is only exclusive on our side becomes gone on their side. But B, we think that larger capital and resources are available for us. So for example, space exploration, NASA and SpaceX collaborating in terms of sending resources to space. When we are the government, we are able to have this national strategic policy and the coordination to make that happen. But when it comes to their side, coordination is extremely hard and difficult to happen because you have different shareholders, you have different customer base, and you basically have different company policies that makes collaboration extremely hard to happen, and for the companies to not necessarily have the incentive to do that as well. But third thing and final thing in terms of why better quality of services will be provided in our team is that you have the incentive to continue popularity for the public when it comes to government. So what that means is privatization, you only have to secure the most interest and the most profit. But we think that in terms of government, you have the incentive to want more people to support you. So what do workers care about? First, working class individuals, they care about each other. For second, we think that they have empathy on lobbyists, and therefore we think that lobbying is not going to work.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Leader of Opposition, you may begin when you're ready. Cheers, cheers.
次の選挙に勝たなきゃいけないからするよね。Government will win the next election. Continue the regimes would do good things for their citizens, not shareholders.
Am I audible? Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We try to win the metric, but moreover, even if state is the better actor in achieving those kind of infrastructure, at the very least, on their side of house, that's fucking time consuming. Time is important because this is an urgent issue. Lack of electricity means the lack of equipment in the hospital, meaning less treatment for the patients. So lack of water, lack of clean water means people cannot drink those water. That's a severe health issue. This is a fucking urgent time-consuming issue. That's what I'm more than happy to propose. Two things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about quality of services. Secondly, I'm going to talk about accessibility of service. Rebuttals would be integrated. So firstly, quality of service, right? So first and foremost, first thing that I want to point out is that the private sector obviously has profit-seeking incentive as I think this is consensus in this debate. So therefore, they are more likely to be sensitive to users' demand. Their response, preemptive response, was to say, firstly, because there's the first mover's advantage, one company that opts into a certain area will take up everything, and other companies wouldn't opt in. Simply, that's not really true. It's unrealistic that one company covers whole entire wide area, right? There's always blue ocean where other companies can opt in, meaning that the competition is quite likely to happen. Because in that situation, other company will advertise the quality of their service, their own service, and call out the lack of quality of service that is provided by the first company. No, thank you. So meaning that the people in that area can who want to switch to other service will be able to call the other competitor in their area. Second thing that they have told us is that you cannot use veto power on our side of the house because you are heavily contingent on the service from the first company. Obviously, this is also contingent on there being only one company, which I've just rebutted. So why is state? Why is private company better, right? So state in general state in general doesn't have an incentive to improve the quality of the service because even if they are like their service is not really good, they are not outcompeted by other competitors, right? So even if they try to collaborate with private sectors on their side of the house, the actor, the state that is controlling those private companies, don't have incentive, don't have possibility to be outcompeted anyway, right? So and responding to their claim that the democratic criticisms happened, right? It is unclear. Democratic criticisms don't work because it is unclear who is in charge of those public utilities, who is actually creating those utilities, right? People really don't know which ministry controls that, which ministry is in charge of that. So they can easily escape from the responsibility. Especially this is true when they use those private sector as collaboration partner, right? They can always blame it on the private sector, right? So and also moreover, even if that's not the case, there is multiple hierarchy within the state system. That's to say, even if people can identify, even if opposition party can identify that who is actually in charge of controlling those infrastructure, they can say that the people who are actually doing the business is in charge of that. I have no, that's none of my business, right? They can easily escape those responsibility because there's a severe hierarchy within the state system. But secondly, even if that's not the case, right, state is inherently short-termist compared to the businesses. This is because state politicians mainly is binded by the election cycles. They're binded by election cycles of 4 years, meaning that they prioritize doing things that is appealing to people within the cycle of 4 years. That's the reason why they are not going to do things like a long-term project, which takes like 10 years or 20 years. That's why they are not going to do things like dam construction or the electricity construction or railroad construction, which takes a long time. What is the harm of that before that? Yes, Keio.
Yeah, do you agree that one of the largest incentives of the state relies on voters?
Yes. So in that case, I think that what I've just proven is that people's criticism don't really work because it's unclear where the responsibility lies, right? So, secondly, even if state is better in terms of the incentive, they have private sector has more capacity to create the infrastructure. So state doesn't have much of expertise and skills. This is because people will oftentimes go to private sectors, right? State cannot really pay much amount of money insofar as their budget is oftentimes limited. Vast majority of developed nations have massive amount of bonds, amount of, they have borrowed a massive amount of money and they cannot utilize much amount of money for those projects. Compare that to the private sector who can collect the money from their own stockholder, and even if they cannot, no thank you, they can easily borrow money from the people. This is because state will have difficulty borrowing money. If they borrow money, that's going to worsen the financial situation of the state, which is highly criticized from the people. But on our side, private sector can do that because they can say this is investment, right? So for that reason, the harm on their side of the house is that there will be less quality of the service in general. So for instance, water pipe is easily breakable, water is dirty and undrinkable, or the electricity wire is easily cut off due to the typhoon or something like that, which overall decreases the quality of life of people who are vulnerable on the ground. So second argument then, even if that's not the case, accessibility of the service, right? So there are broadly two things under this. First is that on their side of the house, state doesn't have much of the state doesn't have an incentive to decrease the price of the services, right? Because there's not much of competition anyway. Even if that's about multiple private corporations trying to do one project, there's not much of competition compared to our side of the house. On our side of the house, there are massive number of private sectors, meaning that they have the incentive to decrease the price by competing with each other, right? So on their side of the house, simply there will be less competition, meaning that they don't have an incentive to decrease the price so that they can gather more consumers, right? So on our side, But secondly, even if that's not the case, state doesn't have much of capacity to provide money. Again, their budget is limited. So conclusion here is that it is likely on our side how the service is way cheaper, right? But second thing under this is that the state doesn't have incentive to expand their service to rural areas as well. This is because of two reasons. A is because there's political deadlock. That's to say, if they try to create services in a wider area, that necessarily comes with the destruction of the environment, meaning that the people who want to care for environment will oppose that. State who want to care about both interests are unlikely to do that. But B is that the construction of So B is that the so conclusion here. Okay. Conclusion here is that at the very least, on their side, path quality and accessibility will decrease, and it's also time-consuming.
Thank you, Hello. DPM, you may begin when you're ready.
Alright, pronouns he, him. I'll take one or two POIs from now. Three, two, one. I'll defend our two cases, first on accessibility, second on quality, then run two extensions. First, on accessibility, we give you three layers from Ayaka's speech. We tell you number one, that there's a lack of competition, that there exists a massive first mover's advantage, especially when it comes to infrastructural matters, and even if not, that it is likely that oligopolies work together to jack up the prices. One line response from opposition is this: it's a fucking blue ocean. First, assertion, but secondly, even if it is a blue ocean, right? You're wasting a lot of money. Why build two pipes when you can get away with one? Either way, we win here. Secondly, we tell you there is no opt-out mechanisms, that you can't simply boycott using water. I have to fucking drink water. I have no basically veto power over the corporation. The response is contingent on there being one corporation. That's not true. If corporations can work together, as we prove, and as we prove that there is massive incentive to do so, then all the prices are high. If I can't say, oh, this water is high, I'll just move to a higher one. Like, same thing. The third response, the third mechanism, which goes completely unengaged to from opposition, is our rural areas argumentation, that uniquely governments have a massive incentive, especially because they no longer have to care as much about profit incentive and have to care more about voter incentive. The comparative we give you is very, very simple. It is likely that voters care a lot about what the corporation does here. We give you a couple of things that voters likely care about. One, a lot of voters are working class, which means that they likely care about other working class individuals. Number two, they likely have empathy, which means that they also care about poorer individuals, even if poor individuals don't have as much voting power. And number three, it is likely that the ruling power doesn't have enough voter margin to be able to tank losses, even if it is in minority communities. We tell you, secondly, that it is unlikely that lobbyists can overpower voter decision here. I asked this in a POI, they also agree that it is likely voter power is the most important thing. We also can give you a couple of reasons why lobbying is unlikely to work, especially because being in power is the premise for you to get any benefits from lobbying. One line response that comes from opposition is this: well, this is not true because people don't know which ministry is responsible for the water, and that there exists some kind of like hierarchy or some shit. Two responses. Number one, it's very clear which ministry is responsible for the water. It is the ministry responsible for the fucking water. But secondly, even if you don't take the fact that the Ministry of Water is likely responsible for the fucking water, it is likely that you still blame the party in general, and it is likely that you still can seek some kind of accountability against the actual party. Second clash, quality of services. We give you two important layers. One, on collaboration that can uniquely exist when there is no incentive to compete with each other. Their mechanism was competition after all. And secondly, that there exists massive capital, especially not just money, but also in the capacity to use things like people. Let's engage to the three responses that comes from opposition. Opposition firstly says, there is no alternative, but there is no competition to the state, and therefore you have no incentive. We already proved there's massive voter incentive. Number two, their second response they give you is, oh, well, states don't have the money, they don't have the capacity to do so. But if the state is so fucking poor to the point where they can't invest a little bit more money in making the services that, in investing in necessary services for individuals to survive, it is likely that investors also don't have that kind of money to be wasting on random development of services. Economic recessions are symmetric in both worlds. The third and I think the most noteworthy response that comes from opposition is states are short-termist. 3 responses. Number 1, this is categorically untrue. Why do states go to war? In the short term, a lot of fucking people die, but in the long term there exists benefit. Just the same. For example, why are states in Japan investing in long-term water irrigation infrastructure? Because even though it may waste money in the short term, there is massive long-term benefit, both in voter perception, but also in the quality of life of individuals on the ground. The second response is to flip this. If you take that states are inherently short-termist, corporations are probably even more short-termist. If at the point in which you lose a shit ton of money in the short term, investors back out, you lose a lot of public funding, and your perception as a corporation dies. Implication? Probably, corporations are even more short-termist than states. At the very least, states have incentive to be altruistic to some extent to please voters. Third, and finally, we're willing to weigh this off. At the very least, we get some kind of qualitative benefit in our world. Opposition proves no benefit in their world. Last 3 minutes of my speech, then I'll run 2 extensions, any POI before that. Cool. First extension then, on sustainable long-term services. There's three main mechanisms to prove this to you. Number 1, the very fact that corporations are affected by the economy makes massive harms to the corporations. Economies fluctuate, markets die, investors back out. And at the point in which that is true, it is likely that corporations have to suddenly stifle innovation, suddenly have to back out of innovation projects, and have to move out of investments that they have made. On the comparative then, 2 things on states. Number 1, governments can likely tank a lot of the costs for public good, especially when it comes to voters' votes. And secondly, governments likely do have a larger budget than singular corporations who are all fighting for market share. The second layer under the argumentation on sustainable long-term services is the fact that a lot of the times these corporations are affected by the user base. That is to say that when individuals back out of their service to go to a different competitor as their entire claim is, that is at the point in which you can't do a lot of the money spending that is necessary through the maintenance and innovation of a corporation. Third and finally, you waste a lot of resources. For example, if I made a shit ton of pipes but another corporation successfully undercut me, all the shit ton of money I wasted on making a bunch of pipes all goes to waste. In the same way they use the competition mechanism, we can directly flip this and say that competition leads to a lot of waste of money that is negative for society in general. Second extension, but before that, last chance for POIs.
Isn't there first mover disadvantage in terms of investigating new regions or investigating the actual demands that exist, and you need to build
Yes.
those
Short-term harm for long-term benefit, but that's why corporations are doing it in the first place. Second extension, there are a lot of other costs in the maintenance of a corporation that states uniquely don't have. 2 layers. Number 1, and the most important layer, there's marketing and sales costs that comes, especially taking opposition's analysis on their existing corporation. I have to appeal to the general public to even exist as a corporation in the next year. What that means is that invest a lot of money in public ad campaigns. We tell you that demand is always there, but demand to your corporation may not always be there taking opposition analysis. The implication, you spend a shit ton of money that you should otherwise be spending on maintaining public infrastructure, on marketing and sales. Second layer, investor relation publicity. You need to, for example, you need people to buy your stock, you need people to trust you. The implication is that you have to hire a lot of people and use manpower and ridiculous due diligence that otherwise doesn't exist when you're a state who doesn't have to do things like meet investor requirements. For all those reasons, then, very, very proud to stand on the proposition that protects citizens. I feel like I swore a lot.
Thank you, EPM. Yellow,
1-0. 2 issues. What is the likely reaction of these private sectors in the context of public utilities, unlike the government's general characterization of regular companies? Secondly, I'm going to talk about why a public state enterprise is likely to be harmful for the stability of government, and why the check and balance is unlikely to happen. The first thing I want to talk about is questioning their very premise of whether they have incentive to hijack the price in the context of public utility. The margin of return of things like electricity is quite small, which means that it's more strategic for corporations to maximize the number of consumers that it has instead of trying to squeeze the limited profit for a couple of reasons. A, because cost to produce electricity is something that is necessarily expensive because there's different facilities that exist which means that increasing the profit margin is not something that is necessarily possible. But the second reason is not using the asset is the biggest minus for negative for these public utilities. Not using the train and having like back-end seats, not using the electricity, and because you are not able to store electricity due to the limited battery technology that exists in the current context, which means that they are not able to wait and hijack the price and force people to pay this price because they lose it. They are likely to make massive loss when they take that strategy. But lastly, because of scale of economy, when they are able to develop things like train or railway, when they are able to gain things like know-how within the region and understand the demands that exist, they have incentive to continuously take advantage of the scale of economies that they were able to develop within the region, which means that they have incentive to continuously develop and continuously increase the number of individuals who they can target their business to. The second thing I want to talk about is why that's why they have incentives to make it affordable given the context of public utility and why increasing the price is in that context is likely to be harmful for this business. The second thing I want to talk about is whether cooperation is likely to be short-term or they are likely to be long-term. They are likely to be long-term for a couple of reasons. Firstly, they want to gain recontract within the region. Given that there's expired contracts that exist within legal obligation, they want to gain trust from the citizens. They want to say that they want to be their business partner continuously, which means that they have incentive to be long term. But the second reason is because the demand is likely to increase within the region. This electricity is necessary prerequisite for things like factories or people coming into the nation and population increasing. And that's why things like foreign direct investment increases within these regions, which means that there's going to be more economic development within the region, which means that there's going to be more demand, which declines the premise that they said that demand is something limited within public utility. It's rather infinite. The next reason is the type of individual who has incentive within this corporation. We think the corporation's criticism is not limited to national boundary, but it's limited to the global financial market. Because the shareholder wants to increase the equity price of the company, which means that they want the company to increase their business as much as possible. And the reason why these investors are likely to be long-term is because this public utility industry is seen to be a long-term investment, because it seems the demand is stable as government conceded, which means that the likely investor is investors like banks or pension funds who have long-term incentive, which means that they have incentive to make sure that they don't waste the money and they effectively ensure sustainable economy. But furthermore, these investors do not only invest on public utility, but they also invest on other companies who are benefiting from this public utility. So they want the trickle-down effect to happen. Things like steel industry, things like development of new factory by the global multinational corporations, for instance. That's why they have the unique incentive to ensure the sustainable and meaningful development of long-term investment within this region is likely to exist. It's another claim they had is fast mover disadvantage, but this is unlikely to be true, because within this fast mover advantage, there's also disadvantage. Things like knowing the geographical condition, the actual market reaction that happens after building the infrastructure, which means that there's still going to be competition after that first company joining in. And I already demonstrated the economy is likely to spark after that investment, which means that other company has incentive to be a free rider and benefit from the development that happened because of the first move. That's why this claim is untrue. Second argument, whether government is accountable. They talk about government, how infrastructure can be something good. But people make decisions based on comparative. They are single issue voter, which means that they are likely to prioritize jobs or welfare which is proximate to them, compared to infrastructure which is long-term and speculative. They never prove why these voters on the ground is able to understand and prioritize infrastructure as most important issue under their side. But also, state has limited capacity, and when they increase the debt, the credit value of their currency is going to decrease, which makes it difficult for them to import different goods. And given that for these developing states, they don't want that to happen. That's why there's a necessary limitation in terms of the incentive for this company to increase the development under their side of the house. The second likely scenario is, even if we assume that this state has long-term incentive, it is likely to be a stable long-term country, which means that they are likely to have incentive to be corrupt, because they want to have power over this corporation by controlling the public utility, which is a premise for economy, which means that they are likely to prioritize being corrupt, getting money from these people, developing political connectionship within the political structure and within the economy to make sure that they are able to gain the short-term return. And this is likely to happen because for these politicians, they are underpaid, especially in developing states. The reason why South Africa was continuously become corrupt is they benefit them from the structure of being corruption, and they desire the direct benefits that they were able to gain in the short term. At the end of the day, governments talk about general economic analysis without talking about why that applies in the context of public utility. For these reasons, proud to oppose.
I'd like to address two key issues in this debate. First of all, quality of service. Second, the accessibility. On quality of service, several things here. Number one, the premise and presumption of their entire case is that there will be some degree of competition. Yes, we agree there will be some degree of competition, but the level of competition is not likely to result the outcome that they have described in this debate. Why is that? Because the initial investment is disproportionately, dramatically huge for newcomers to sustainably and successfully continue their operation. The best example is mobile industry or telecommunication industry. The Rakuten Mobile, the company called Rakuten, tried to enter this competition of telecommunication. However, what happens is that industrial exclusion. The Softbank, AU, docomo, KDDI, they collaborated together to exclude Rakuten, and they didn't lower the price of mobile. We have to pay monthly fee of $100. And Rakuten tried to dismantle the structure, but they failed because all the kichi kyoku or base infrastructure were already established by those existing corporations or large conglomerate. So it was very difficult for Rakuten to even discover new spaces in local areas, and huge investment was necessary. As a result of that, the situation of Rakuten is disastrous. They are selling their many important businesses in order for company to even survive, and that's the situation. So the realistic level of competition is very monopolistic and oligarchy. I think there is the completely free competition that opposition described is structurally very less likely to occur. On the second level, their analysis is that private sectors are able to conduct fundraising. They can borrow money from banks or equity finance. Therefore, huge investment is possible. That's not true because huge initial investment is necessary. Usually, debt is disproportionately high. For example, Japan Railway, they have huge multiple debt. It's very hard for banks to inject further capital on those kinds of entity with multiple debt. Or if they are talking about startups or venture company, I think no investors will inject huge amount of capital to those small and medium-sized corporations. Moreover, even if the best case scenario, even if those private entities are able to get funded or get funds from investors, what happened is that their priority is now investors rather than consumers in local areas. So their priority now is to pay money back to investors in a contractual period of time. They have to pay money back within 5 years, for example. So they have to increase the price in order to make ends meet, or they have to distribute profit for investors and shareholders, just like SoftBank has to prioritize Nomura securities rather than consumers. So therefore, the likely scenario is that the vulnerable individuals living in local areas will be deprioritized in the allocation of scarce resources, unlike a ruling political party who have a political incentive to win the next election. Therefore, even in best case scenarios, well, who will be benefiting at whose expense? The investors who inject money to those corporations will be benefiting at the expense of the general utility to citizens. By contrast, what will happen on our side of the house? Their assertion is that states do not have incentive to increase the quality of services. Not true. That's a sweeping generalization. Workers, engineers, in those public sectors have all the incentive to make good track records, achievement in terms of promotion, salary, and track records in their industry and business. For example, NASA, National Medical Center, or DCAN, all the best talented individuals are working there in order to create track record. Why? Because the budget is crazily huge compared to private sector. When it comes to space explorations, the reason why collaboration between NASA and SpaceX and Tesla by Elon Musk is happening right now is because it was a strategic industrial project with huge budgets. Therefore, this centralization of resources attracts a lot of good human resources, best talents in the world. Therefore, the kind of improvement of quality is likely to happen on our side of the house. Their concern is time consuming, right? No, we can have a best fast track record to good improvement on our side of the house under the centralization of resources with a huge capital. And that is why we think we can ensure better quality of services for general utility.
Point.
Go!
How do you engage with the developing state in which they lack tax revenue and they also care about debt and credit rating agency within the financial market?
That's my second argument. That's a wonderful point of information about accessibility. On case of a developing country, if that's the real context, I don't think there will be credible private sectors as well. The private sectors in developing countries are also very weak in terms of human resources, capacity, technology to operate those businesses. On the second level, if we are talking about the context of one dominant ruling party exists just like a Jiminto in Japan, they have incentive to win next election as well. They need to run office for the next period of time. Therefore, they have all the more incentives to cater to sustainable demand. If we are talking about context of bipartisan structures like the United States, in which Democrats and Republican exist, then there will be much more stronger pressure and democratic scrutiny and check and balance mechanism from opposition party in terms of the allocation of resources. In that circumstance, corruption is very less likely to occur. Their only engagement is that, in case of corporations, they have to maximize the number of customers, therefore they don't increase price. No, when it comes to utility, they can do both. Increase in user base and increase the price. They can do both at the same time because there is no option for user not to use water, not to use electricity. There are less switching options for consumers in the first place. So therefore, I think there will be massive marketing costs, promotion costs. They have to launch TVCM. They have to launch advertisement in the street like Softbank is doing it all the time. Those marketing costs will be placed upon the price. That is the cost that consumers have to pay out, right? By contrast, when the utility is operated by the state, we don't have to spare that much resources for marketing costs. We are more than happy to propose. Thank you.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes,
Thank you. My speech starts in 3, 2, 1. 2 pieces of framing before getting into the clash. First, I think yes, we have latent display was much greater than display for the reason we have solutions about agent that we have more nuance about agency, which is the shared agency of controlling those kind of projects in public facilities. No, we've been saying that as long as the state has 60% of popularity, that is going to be the reason why they're starting to win the next election in the city in terms of city election level, not also national level. That's the reason why company has a unique, company is exclusive and unique stakeholder to bet less than 40%. In order for secondary company, small and medium enterprises to be a bigger portion, to have a bigger portion in that market, in betting that portion. That is the reason why we're going to have much more inclusive and accessible benefit. Second reason why we take this way is like I think best cases coming from opposition has been left almost untouched. The new person has given you, it's like, for example, developing country, much better to have multinational corporations that is huge enough to have a rapid and industrial growth. I think the response probably coming from propositions like, for example, those multinational companies going to be leaving soon. I think even in that case, even if you buy that case, buy that sort of cases, I think they're going to be still not futile for certain reasons. First, I think as long as those multinational companies coming into your country, that is going to be probably inciting the industrial cluster. For example, you have facilities, you have economic fluctuation, you have economic facilities along companies alongside those kind of things, and you're going to have those kind of economic area. That is just going to increase in money flow and also going to be accelerating the information of public facility. That is the reason why more individuals are going to be able to able to access to clean water rather than like drinking water, dirty water every single day. I think this has not been responded back from proposition. But I think also Toshiyata has given another further reasons as to why this is simply going to be better in those kind of best case scenario. For the reason, as long as state control companies when those kind of state control company gets corrupted, I think that's going to be likely to happen in case of Myanmar or these kind of countries. I think that's going to be further worsening conditions for individuals, right? I think this is likely to happen. I think you also the further analysis as to why this is likely to happen. This is likely to be better on option. It's like those kind of multinational companies going to be bear those severe criticism from international market rather than just having opposition party claiming something to the central party on a proposition. I think the clear weighing here is like, especially even if you consider the best case scenario coming from proposition, like individual needs, like for example, individual needs to sacrifice their votes in order to have veto power. I think that's the contextualization coming from proposition is much wealthier contextualization such as Japan or these kind of things. I think individual living there has more, to some extent, has more financial capacity to afford, for example, going to the grocery store and have a plastic bottle of water in order to have veto power, rather than people in Indonesia drinking dirty water from river every single day. I think that is comparatively we need to talk about getting no thank you. So moving on to the clash. First, I'm going to dealing with the debate based upon stakeholder. First about state and second about corporations. So state. I think they have to play in a lot of things. The main contestation, one of the main contestations coming from proposition was like the veto power. I think I've got several responses here. First, I'm not sure to what extent individuals are likely to buy into those kind of veto power for the reason actually, especially given the fact those kind of individuals do not understand to what extent they need to sacrifice or to what method is the most effective in order to crack down those kind of central those kind of party to begin with. I think in order given existence of structural diarrhea, for example, such as gerrymandering, such as like voting system, election corruption, all these kind of things. I think even if you consider the best scenario, individuals are going to have voice up, going to be appealing to veto power. I think that's going to be working effectively. The reason why they felt this way is simply they couldn't explain the extent of likelihood. That is the reason why we take this way. Likely consequences on a proposition is like those kind of things are going to be short-termist and going to be not less inclusive rather than corporations. Several things to say here. First, I think the reason, I think the leader of the opposition really gave you the reason why it at least needs to win the next election in order to have after the next 4 years. Never responded back from the opposition side. The only response we got from a government was like, well, they invest into certain like long-term benefits such as war or these kind of things. No, this is not the case for the reason that those kind of war intervention is prominent, most urgent short-term benefit they want to claim. I think there has been no realistic mechanization as to why companies do care about the long-term benefit by sacrificing short-term benefit. No, thank you. But secondly, the worst case scenario that is likely to happen on the proposition that those kind of states getting impacted, nobody has enough authority to interact in those kind of situation. I think the ones like comparison much better. The second thing is here that a bit louder become state being black box. The only basic response we had from the proposition was like, oh, we have Ministry of Water, those kind of things. No, we have been giving much more nuanced responses that even within those kind of ministry, we have different individuals that is responsible for many sort of diverse of things. We have many companies who are engaged. Individuals do not understand to what extent to which company is responsible in those kind of particular cases. That is the reason why the black box still happen on the side. Economic fluctuation is symmetric applies on that side as well. But I think that's my father was on the proposition for the reason. Obviously, in comparison between like corporation and state is more subject to the fluctuation in terms of currency, all these kind of things. For the reason they are more responsible monetary policy and fiscal policy. Expertise also symmetrically applies. I think that's going to be this rather guaranteed on the side of the house for the reason that this what they can guarantee like among the investment for the project itself, not necessarily the individual salaries to begin with. I think the reason we have to clarify the reason structural incentive why companies have more capacity to do that. Moving on to the second question of the company. Many things to say here. First, I think the most important nuance coming from the opposition, that is to say quickness, has not been responded from the opposition. No, this is an urgent issue, whether you have clean, safe water, whether you can utilize air conditioner in quite hot summer day or like this cold fucking freezing day. I think this is the reason why urgency is enough reason for you to make an opposition be. Secondly, I think competition still happens competition still happens to enough extent for two reasons. First, I think several oligopolies is simply enough for the reason as long as there's multiple companies, those are huge, unlike proposition, only one institution control everything. I think there will be less slight chances that like competition still happens on that side. I think this slight chances is quite important because we are talking about much more quite proximate issues. I think less like just 50 yen of decrease in terms of price of electricity is not enough for individuals to very powerful force.
This debate for two reasons. First is because they have been uncompetitive. Their main benefit, we believe, is to say there will be more long-term projects on their side of the house, or more investment like that. But note that they didn't really prove to what extent that's likely to be long-term on their side of the house, and even if that's long-term, why is it so impactful on their side of the house? What we have proven in terms of mechanism is that shareholders have incentive to make it long-term, and have the incentive to spur the economy in that area, which means the company have the incentive to do it in long-term. We think that I didn't really think that they didn't prove to what extent that's going to be long-term, and the consequence of that was unclear. But secondly, even if you believe all of this is wash, I think we have given you enough exclusive delta. That's to say, they will take so much amount of money. They have to go through a lot of democratic processes so that the project to be approved by the people, by the parliament, by whatever actor involved. Which means that we have told from leader of opposition that this is about urgent issue, and therefore we think that's important. So two things: firstly, accessibility, and secondly, quality of service. So accessibility. Their claim was to say, competition doesn't happen on our side of the house, and competition doesn't happen on our side of the house. Because the company that firstly opts into this area will have first mover advantage. We have given you three responses to this. First is that it's simply untrue, right? There would be other companies who will have the incentive and the capacity to actually opt into this area. A is because first mover disadvantage actually happens. If you are first actor that opts into this area, you have to create a railroad from scratch, meaning that you have got a lot of cost, meaning that you have to increase the price or like that, meaning that I don't think there is massive first mover advantage. But second thing that we have said is that even if that's not the case, other company will be able to get benefit from opting into this industry, opting into this area by utilizing the already established infrastructure or already by benefiting from the already spurred economy in that area. Meaning that we have already proven to you the incentive and capacity for other actors to opt into this area. So competition is there, and their premise that the competition doesn't happen is actually not really standing, right? Second thing that we have told you is that regardless of competition, shareholders have an incentive to make it a long term. That's to say that shareholders, shareholders oftentimes care more about long-term benefit over the state on their side of the house. So the third thing that we suggest is that the state. It was unclear why state will not dominate this market on their side of the house. If state is so absolute actor on their side, state can monopolize all of that, and I don't think they were able to prove comparative benefit, comparative exclusivity as to why on their side of the house there will be massive competition anyways. So for that reason, I don't think accessibility issue was taken by their side. Second, equality. So their claim was to say state is more long-termist. State is more long-termist. But if you look at your notes, you probably notice that they just responded to our claim and didn't actually engage with our nuance. Our claim is that the state cares about 4 years of an election cycle, and their response was that no, company is more short-termist because they care about money or like that. Note that this doesn't engage with our nuance, because what we have said is that shareholders can be a long-termist, and company can borrow enough amount of money from can borrow some money, meaning that just because you care about money doesn't mean that you will be short-termist. So it was unclear overall to what extent the state will be uniquely long-termist on their side of the house. But secondly, regarding capacity, right? It was also unclear why state has massive amount of money, right? They said SMEs or small company will not be able to get money, but clearly on our side of the house, we utilize the company that they will collaborate on their side of the house. So capacity is simply not really important.
Thank you, opposition reply. Government reply, you may begin when you're ready. Here is here.
What do we need to do in the next election? Let's get larger seats in Congress.
What often gets wrong is that competition isn't a magic bullet. Corporations can work together to jack up prices. Corporations can exclude newcomers. The implication? You can't just say competition and expect it to solve everything. I'm going to talk about two main things. First on capacity, then second on incentives, comparing corporations and states. First, on capacity. Our claim is very, very simple. We tell you three things. Three problems with corporations. Number one, that nobody is likely to give them money, which comes from Mitsushi's speech. We already have the money. Second, that corporations have other payments, marketing payments. They also have to pay their investors who hold equity in the corporation. Number three, there is no centralization, which leads to the lack of manpower, lack of resources, etc. The best response they can come up with for a POI is to say that, developing nations. Let's talk about this dumb developing nations contest. Two things. Number one, this is a fucking dumb contest. Developing countries, state has no money, corporations have no money. We're going to talk later. And secondly, it's likely going to be a monopoly. Let's assume their best context. Let's assume MNCs come into this developing country for some reason. There's endless areas to expand to, which means that there's unlikely to be competition in the context of a developing nation, which implicates to a lot of price gouging that occurs by MNCs. The other thing that they mentioned, which I think is of some note under the capacity mechanism, is to say, there's a lot of democratic processes that exist in the state, and therefore they're unlikely to be able to cater to the urgency of the situation. Corporations have a lot of bureaucracy as well. Look at the boards that they have to please. Look at the investors they have to please. I don't see why states are in any way unique, and they have to prove why on the comparative then states are worse off in this regard. More importantly then, on incentives. The best material they have here comes from DLO. Voters don't care. Their example of things voters likely care more about is things like, environment or job protection. Intuitively though, I obviously likely care more about whether I can drink water for the next week than I do care about protecting my job in the next month. If citizens don't make it a voting issue, it is likely that the state is doing relatively well, and if the state is so bad to the point where citizens are fucking like dying of dehydration, likely voters will care. We at the very least protect the worst forms of harm. Second thing they say, veto power is very high when it comes to corporations. Really? What are you gonna do? Like, the best thing you can do is probably litigate them or sue them because you can't boycott them. And litigation is obviously a much higher barrier to entry compared to just going to a voting poll and voting against the ruling party. The third thing they say is, well, we don't know who to hold accountable inside the government, and therefore the government is a black box. But as I said, it's the fucking ministry in charge of the thing that you're trying to protect, right? If it is water, it's probably the Ministry of Sanitation. And sure, we agree, there are structures within the ministry, but we aren't holding individuals accountable. We are holding the ministry accountable. We're holding the ruling party accountable. We don't need to figure out who did it. We need to figure out the party that did it. That I don't think is that hard. Finally, the last thing under incentive, long-term versus short-term incentive. 3 things. Number 1, even if corporations have longer-term incentives, the fact that investors can pull out at any time means that risk-taking is unlikely to happen on opposition, which is necessary for innovation and for expansion. Secondly, empirically speaking, there's a lot of scenarios in which states have done long-term programs, even if it leads to short-term harm. Look at the massive amounts of money invested into Obamacare. Look at every single war that countries have gone to. Thirdly, corporations fundamentally can't take permanent losses. That even in the long term, they have to make some profit at some point. At the very worst scenario, we can still stomach even continuous losses for the rest of eternity, which sometimes does have to happen in the case of necessary utilities. Finally, last 20 seconds then, let's engage to their best case. Their best case is a situation where they're massively competitive, where these corporations are super collaborative, and they have big capital. 2 things. Number 1, this is not likely for a lot of reasons. This is firstly an assertion. Secondly, competition and collaboration is obviously mutually exclusive. And third and finally, there is no reason for corporations to have this incentive. But secondly, even if you accept this, the crucial comparative is nationalization leads to state backlash, individual backlash. The benefits and opposition is only accessible to the people in Tokyo. At the very least, we protect rural areas. And for that, very, very proud to stand on proposition in a wonderful semifinals. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you everyone. All speeches are over. Please wait in the DOR while we